month. Here we are with one of our Latina leaders rising. Diana and I have been connected for decades now, and I have watched her grow into this incredible professional. She works at Microsoft, and we use Microsoft every day, don't we? But she immigrated from Colombia as a teenager. So we're going to start talking all about that and then figure out how did she get to where she is today and what lessons can we learn from her. So Diana, welcome from the bottom of my heart. I'm so happy to see you and to have you share with our women and people that are listening all about your story and what they can learn from your journey.
Thank you, Juana, for having me, and hello, everyone. Super excited to be here with you all and to share a little bit more about my story and hopefully give you some tidbits and nuggets to help you start getting energized, connected, and building that community. That is what's going to help you continue to move forward in your journey.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of our themes today. How, you came here when you were a teenager and had to start building community and how important that is and how you've actually taken that into the second biggest corporation in the world, right? So tell us a little bit about your journey when you came from Colombia. You couldn't speak English very well, right? And you landed in Florida like I did. The banana boat I came on landed in Tampa. So similar story, except I was a child. So tell me what it was like and how you made your way.
Yeah, so I like to think of my origin story as one of resilience and adaptation. And it is truly a testament to the strength and determination of my family. I immigrated to the United States from Colombia at the age of 15. I was a teenager. And this was not a personal decision. It was a decision driven by my parents' dreams and hopes for a safer environment and a better future for my sister and for me. And the transition was a whirlwind of emotions. I was on the verge of finishing high school in Medellin, Colombia. I, according to 15-year-old self, had my life figured out. I knew where I was going to go to university. I know what I wanted to study. And suddenly my world turned upside down.
Wow. Yeah. And for teenagers, that's like double trouble because, your family and your friends and your community and your school. Oh, so here you are. I can't even imagine. And you landed in Orlando, right?
Yes, Orlando, Florida. And for security reasons, we couldn't really tell our friends or family members where we were going. And so that also created a very abrupt and painful kind of rupture in our family life.
So
And
Diana, explain a little bit because I think a lot of times, not so much with our community, but the Hispanic community, a lot of times they don't understand why people leave their homeland. And it has to be something very serious because you're not going to give up everything. So what was the conditions like? What do you think your parents were trying to do?
yeah, it was mostly the reality of difficult conditions in the country at the time with a lot of violence and my father wanting to truly create better opportunities for my sister and for me. I always think about all that they left behind. They had their
Right.
businesses. My dad had built very prominent career. He had worked with big companies and governments. He was also an entrepreneur. And so knowing all of the sacrifices that both him and my mom did just so that we can have a safer environment, it's really significant, right? And to your
Yeah. No, no,
point,
no. I mean, a third of our community are immigrants, and I think that dysphoria, that pain that we have. But like you said, a challenge, and I know you think this way, all of a sudden you're learning resiliency, adaptability, determination, and probably expanding who you can relate to, because all of a sudden you're relating to a lot of gringos, a lot of people that you hadn't had a chance to interface with. And it's making you very adaptable, able to go between the two worlds. But talk about the hardship because you walk into a school and you really don't understand everything.
yeah, we landed in Orlando, Florida with only basic English skills, right? And we got put into a new culture that was foreign and overwhelming, right? I was coming from an all-girls Catholic school that was private, and then we moved into a space with a public high school with a completely different culture, right? And like I always think about the frame of reference that I had back then about life in high school was the show Saved by the Bell. And that was nothing like what I experienced when I walked into Point Siena High School in 1998. And so, yeah, it was the task of integrating into a school system that was unfamiliar and, to be honest, unwelcoming, and just facing commentary about who we were, what we brought, if we were smart or not smart, if we could stay in some classes or not, because there were assumptions being made about what we knew.
Well, also, I think a lot of children that are learning the language get labeled as not smart, you know, and that's true both as when they're young. You know, it's a different experience to come as a teenager because that's the time you're really connecting with friends and, you know, doing your own social network in a sense. But I remember when we chatted about this, you were talking about the mentors that you had, that sense of, I need to find someone to help me with this, right? That sense of who could be my anchor, who could show me the way. So tell me a little bit about that, because that's so important for all of us to be doing, reaching out to people.
Yeah, and I think in that context, when I think about two experiences that really marked me and motivated me to start looking for that support and that guidance. The first one was getting into a class, an advanced economics class, and the teacher, upon seeing me and seeing in my document that I was an English as a second language student, telling me that he didn't want me in his class because I will lower his scores. And that cut deep, deep. But at the same time, it ignited this fire in me, this resolve to not only prove him wrong, but to excel beyond his expectations. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. Like, I needed help. And then the second one was still subtle yet impactful. It's a new school. It's big. I got lost. And so here I am trying to figure out where I'm going and what's left and what is right. And I found someone that I had heard speaking in Spanish. And so I went and asked for help, and that person refused to help me in Spanish.
Oh, they wanted you to speak English.
Yes. And that small act of rejection was a stark reminder of how isolated and invisible someone can feel in a new place. And so those two things immediately marked a deep sense of wanting a different experience, not just for me, but for others, right? And so first is like, who do I can go to for guidance and support? And so I went to the individual in the administrative office that had helped us with the placement. And I started building a relationship with her so that I could get more of that guidance and resources to be able to navigate specifically the situation with the economics teacher.
Did you get in the class?
I did get in the class, and I got A's in every single test, which
I love this because so many of us, you know, I say that when I was growing up, if I was given a challenge, I was going to do it, you know, and I think there's that sense, and Latinos really have been doing that here in this country for 500 years. And, you know, when we are presented a no or a challenge, we just work harder and we overcome that. You know, it gets to be a problem when you're older because we know we keep putting too much pressure on ourselves. But what an incredible thing. If, you know, we have a session coming up is when I hear no, I say game's on, or when I hear no, I'm going to try harder, or when I hear no, I'm going to find another door. I think that resiliency and adaptability, talk about how that helps in your business.
Yeah, and for me, it's that I hear you can do it, and I will tell you, let me show you.
Let me show you how. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So great. So you got straight A's, and that's an interesting class you took, economics.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other piece going to that moment of rejection, it was this, for me, is this piece of determination of turning what is negative, a negative experience, into something positive. And so what I did was that I asked my parents for a pin with the Colombian flag, and I wore that pin every day to school because I wanted it to be a signal. I wanted it to be a sign for anyone else who was lost or who needed help or who was looking for connection, to get identify that ping and know that person is Colombian, that person speaks Spanish, that person is a Latina, let me go and approach them. And so it was a visible way for me to also start showing allyship and supporting others that could potentially be in the same situation that I was at that time.
Wow, I love that, because it's not just the allyship and the mentoringship. It's actually realizing that we can reach out to others and to help them find their way. That's such a Latino value, that whole idea that we don't just do it for ourselves, we do it for others. It's such a collective culture that we are, and how important that is. So I guess it wasn't too much of proms and all that during your high school. It sounds like it was more of a while everybody's having proms and running around, you're trying to navigate, okay, I'm an immigrant, how am I going to make it here? And it makes us so resilient. But I do know that when you went to the University of Central Florida, you were able to find other Colombianas and find Latin Americans. I got a chance to teach there, and it's such an incredible university, and work with the DACA students there. So all of a sudden you had familia.
And it's such a beautiful piece, Juana, because when you are removed from the people that you love and the people that you know, and you crave that connection, you start looking for people. And all of a sudden, I was having siblings from Guatemala and Puerto Rico and Venezuela, right? Friends that became family. Same thing was happening like all around our community as we were getting connected and going to church. There was this couple that adopted my family, and I called them my grandparents, right? And loved them as if they were my grandparents. And they loved us as if we were their grandchildren. Abuelo Vicky and Abuela Raymond, who are Puerto Rican. And so it got me connected to people, to love, to traditions, and to family beyond what I know to be true in Colombia. Like I learned around.
So you really have this connection to our community with the different subgroups in Puerto Rico and all the Latin Americans you met. That's a quality that Latinos have. I always invite people to become Latino, in the sense that we have such an idea of extended family, of madrinas, padrinos, primos, abuelos, all adopted, but they're still ours, right? And what an incredible gift for the diversity and inclusion work you do now.
It is. Definitely it was part of the foundation, right? When I think about what got me to fall in love with the work that I do, to actually even get me connected to understanding that this was a possibility, is some of those early connections that I made. You mentioned the University of Central Florida. And so I was about to graduate. My bachelor's is in psychology with a focus on industrial psychology. And one of the requirements for me to be able to graduate was to do assistantship, a research assistantship. I had it all figured out. I had something going on with, at the time it was called NAVAIR. It was a research branch of the Navy. And 9/11 happened. I was not a US citizen. And NAVAIR decided to say, no, you can't do your research assistantship with us because you're not a US citizen. I was panicking. And so I grabbed the directory of professors at the University of Central Florida, trying to look for that one professor who had a Latino sounding last name, who could guide me and help me. I found one professor. Last name was Stone Romero, is Stone Romero. And be honest, I stalked him. Like I was at his office waiting for him to either come in or come out. I figure out what his schedule was and what classes he was teaching, and I will wait for him outside of class until I finally managed to get myself 15 minutes with him. I explained my situation, and he said, sure, see you Monday at 7 a.m. Little did I know that that was the way he got rid of undergraduates, because he didn't like working with undergraduates.
Because nobody was going to show up at 7 a.m.
Little did he know who he was dealing with, because I'm a morning person. So
I do want to remind our leaders, our listeners, hey, that's resiliency, that's innovation, that's creativity, that's not giving up. I'm going to sit by the office until I get this interview. And I love those kind of stories, because that's how we get ahead. Sometimes it is opportunity, the door just opens, but many times we have to be there knocking and knocking and knocking.
And not giving up, right? And just being able to articulate not just what you need, but also what you bring to the table, right? And it's super interesting because I showed up at 6:55 a.m., knocked on the door, he opens and he looked shocked. I'm like, well, you told me to be here at 7. My dad told me that if I'm on time, I'm late, so I'm always early. That's the way that
I want to do that little bit of cultural adaptation there. Her father said, if you're on time, you're late. And it really is true. When I started working in corporate America, that you come to the meeting a little bit early, because that way people know you're ready. Your game's on. You've done your homework. And so I had to learn that rule the hard way. You don't show up 10 minutes late. You show up early, everyone.
You show up early and ready. And that relationship that I built with Dr. Eugene Stone Romero opened many doors for me. Mind you, he was actually not Latino. He is Navajo.
He's Navajo.
Yes, he's Navajo. And through the conversations that we started to have and the relationship that I was able to build with him, I learned so much about his culture and his story, how he felt a part of the Hispanic Latinx community, because after he came back from the Vietnam War, it was the Mexican community that adopted him and provided him a home and provided him with community and provided him with a feeling of connection and family. And so it was so many beautiful ways of exploring that cultural tapestry of the United States, that those threads of community, those threads of culture. And it was through that research assistantship, through the relationship that I was able to build with him, through demonstrating my commitment to the work, my responsibility, my accountability, that he started to open doors for me. He connected me to his wife, who was on the business school, and who introduced me to the work of HR. He invited me to be part of a research project that they were starting on the influence of culture in organizations. And so all of a sudden, my perspective changed. I was going to school to do a bachelor's in psychology and go be a psychologist because I wanted to help people. And then I got introduced to the world of industrial psychology and human resources. And what better way to help people than change the workplaces in which we spend so much of our time?
Oh, that's so beautiful. It reminds me because, we do so much work on personal purpose, and how when you get in sync with what you need to do with your life, because we were all born at a certain time with certain gifts, with certain interests, and then certain experiences start happening to us when we say yes, which I think is the important thing, is to say yes. And so here you are at such a young age, kind of being, because that's what you do today, kind of being prepared, being given skills, having people that are doing it, showing you how. So that's such a great story that you started at such a young age. No wonder you have such an important job at your age. So yeah, and I love the part, I have to say this about the Navajo culture and your Puerto Rican grandparents and how people reach out and build community, because that's our superpower for Latinos and people of color, is that we like to connect relationships, community, people helping each other, and also the way you've been able to play that forward, to really help others. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing today and how this prepared you. But I also want to go back and hear about a couple of your challenges and what you love about the Latino culture, and how you think Latinos can add to the diversity and inclusion conversation today.
So when I think about what I'm doing today and the point that you mentioned about that sense of purpose or mission, those early experiences that I've had of feeling discounted, dismissed, not valued, made it very clear for me that my mission is to contribute to a world where diversity is celebrated, inclusion is the norm, and everyone has the chance to realize their full potential. And so I want to inspire others to lead with authenticity and resilience so that we can create those environments where everyone is feeling valued and empowerment. When I think about my sense of purpose, there's a deep connection in my commitment to creating systemic change and fostering environments where opportunities for growth are available to everyone. And there's where the connection to the work that I do around diversity and inclusion comes in, right? My work is directly connected to that mission. It allows me to live my purpose every day. Because I work for a company whose mission is to empower every person in every organization to achieve more. Where
Okay, say that again, because this is Microsoft. So their mission is to?
empower every person and every organization to achieve more. And like how beautiful it is. We're not talking about some people, we're talking
That's
about
such a great mission.
everyone.
Yes.
Right? And so, for me is how do I support the company in creating those spaces where everyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their story, regardless of their history, regardless of who they pray to, who they love, what is their skin tone, where everyone can succeed and make a meaningful difference. And what better connection can I ask for to that purpose that I had set for myself and for my life? And so this mission to empower others, especially those from underrepresented communities, is connected to my mission of embracing cultural identity as a way to support people leading with authenticity and getting opportunities to work at places like Microsoft.
Right. So you're saying that to lead with authenticity, you have to really embrace who you are. And a key piece of that is your culture, your race, your religion, whatever it is that you have to embrace that in order to be an authentic leader. Talk about how that's connected, because that's a beautiful connection.
I mean, when you're hiding parts of yourself, you are spending so much energy that is going to prevent you from being able to deliver on the project or connect with the individuals that you're working with. And so that ability for you to fully embrace who you are and know who you are and explore it as a source of power is what's going to set you apart. And it's what is going to allow companies, not just Microsoft, to truly innovate for the benefit of society, to create products that are relevant and experiences that are relevant and that are serving everyone, not just a few.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting to me because, and part of it is exploring who you are, getting to know who you are. And part of it is overcoming the rough edges, maybe, or like you were talking about some of the rejection you experienced in high school. And I think we've all, and a lot of it's sort of like unconscious bias. It's unconscious. You just don't feel like you belong, right? You don't just feel like you can say what you need to say. You're monitoring your own voice, right? So a lot of times it isn't like overt, it's really more internal. And so people need to also not only explore who am I, but do some healing around some of the rejections and some of the exclusion that we've experienced, or just that feeling of I don't belong, or I may not have the right stuff,
Yeah, and Juana, that point actually reminds me of some of the experiences that I've had. And you mentioned challenges that I've overcome. And so when I think about challenges abound, setbacks abound, I like to think of them as learning opportunities for me to get to know myself better, and for me to get closer connected to my culture and my authentic self, but also to my values and my principles. And I will say that one of the biggest challenges that I face has been confronting the stereotypes and the biases that are associated with being a Latina leader. Early in my career, this is a memory that I think will never go away. I experienced several moments that tested my self-confidence. And the one that particularly comes to mind is sitting in a meeting with a bunch of important people, sharing an idea and a perspective, and hearing someone from across the room say, "Little brown girl, the adults are talking. Be quiet."
They said, what? Little brown
girl, the adults are talking, be quiet.
No.
And like that moment, one, I was hoping someone was going to say something. No one said anything. And I walked out of that meeting feeling so deflated, questioning my place and my worth, right? If I think of experiences that I've had where I've been told to modify my appearance, to wear less bright colors or less close-fitting clothes, to be less passionate, to be less direct, to be less assertive, where I've been told that I'm too much, that I'm extra, that I have unrealistic expectations. Like all of those have been indications that I needed to be less of who I am, that I needed to be less of my authentic self.
Well, I call it monitoring yourself, that all of a sudden, instead of opening up and being you, you have to be monitoring and figuring out, how do I fit in here? What language do I use? You don't have sure footing because you're not quite sure where to place your foot.
And like those were experiences that, outside of being emotionally exhausting, they lead to moments of self-doubt. Like
Yes.
the many times that I've just started thinking, is this the right place for me? Am I bringing value to this organization? Like, what do I need to do differently? What I will say is, back to some of the threads that we've had through the conversation, is that those challenges have taught me invaluable lessons. And not just because the lessons came to me, because I was able to have a conversation and process those moments with the mentors and the sponsors and the allies that I have built through my career, right? And being able to reground myself on that power of resiliency and self-reflection, using those experiences as opportunities to be stronger, to get closer into that space of my cultural identity is a source of strength and power. It is not a hindrance. And so, to your point of that work that is needed for us as Latinos and Hispanics and Latinx and Latine individuals to self-accept first. Because if we don't do it, these challenging moments will hit us twice as hard.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the most significant lessons I've learned is the importance of doing that work, that deep work of healing, of looking for the help and the resources to move past the trauma so that I can continue to lead with authenticity and confidence.
You know what I love about this is that you went and sought out again, which has been one of your strengths your whole life, is to go seek the help, but also to put the flag on and say, I am here to help. So it's been a two-way street, which is really what makes you such a powerful leader. But that whole idea that you find people, because when someone is, I'll say, wounded, or feels inadequate, or doesn't feel very smart, which is, I think I'm a professor now because I had to prove I was smart. I was always trying to prove I was smart. And so now it's like, give it a break, Juana. But you know what I mean? You had to keep proving you were smart. So, but you can't do it on your own, because when it's internalized, like when I was little and I thought I was internalized. The other thing is, just our stature, when they said little brown girl, so, we're smaller. And so you have to kind of realize that you have to carry yourself in a certain way. But that whole idea of, you have to talk to other people, because otherwise you think, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm too not assertive. I'm too aggressive. Or I speak out too much and I'm too passionate, where in reality, maybe the group needs a little bit of, salsa. Maybe they need a little bit of passion, because things can get pretty boring. Well, talk to us a little bit about how you do this at Microsoft, but what is actually some of the tidbits that you can give other people that are listening. That and the part I like about it is that you're trying to create an organizational culture, a place where people can go and feel and be accepted. So how do you do that? Give us a few tips of how you can create a culture like that.
Yeah, so I think it always starts with the basics. What I like to tell people is that the work of diversity and inclusion is work that requires systemic change. And that is work that takes time. This is not about events. This is not about surface level work. It's truly deep work. And a lot of times it requires an awareness of the day-to-day interactions that are taking place. And so in my journey at Microsoft and the work that I do on the team that I lead, we have responsibilities for a couple of things. One of them is setting up that roadmap for the set of skills and behaviors that leaders should be demonstrating in order to curate that inclusive culture, building the resources to support employees and leaders on the behavior changes, the behaviors that should be demonstrated, the way in which we should be engaging in conversation, productive and constructive conversation around topics of identity. And then also some other integration work into our systems, our processes, and our policies.
So give me an example. One
Let's
thing you
see.
would have leaders do that would help create this environment.
Yeah, so I think for like one of the coaching conversations that I often have with leaders is having them connect first with their own identity so that they can realize where is it showing up as an asset and where is potentially showing up as a derailer, right? And so having the dialogue around exploration of your own biases, exploration of your own privilege, right? It's one of the interventions that I can
You're
think of.
talking to the white men about this?
We're talking to everyone. Yes.
So,
So yeah, we have
yeah, that's
plenty
really
of
good,
interventions.
Diane. I like this. So let's talk about your privilege. Let's talk about your biases. I congratulate you for, first of all, doing that. And I also have a very open heart to those that are willing to learn, that really want to create this, because in reality, we have to have everyone on board. And I also know that you're doing it at pretty high levels of the organization, which is totally important as well, correct?
Yes. And I think to that point, when I like the importance of having everyone in the conversation, right? Like I've had to done this for myself as well. I need to understand that there are moments in which I carry privilege. I went to university. I have
Yes.
a college degree. I work for a tech company. And so while some parts of my identity will likely not be seen as something that gives me privilege, others do. And so depending on the context in which I'm operating, I need to be aware of the privilege that I'm carrying and how am I using it in support of the work that I do and of the individuals that I want to impact.
Wow. Yeah. Well, when I teach leadership, they say that leadership is how to be, not how to do it. And then, I have done a lot of work in servant leadership, which was started by Robert Greenleaf. And he said, you're really called to leadership to heal yourself, to make yourself whole. And I think that's such an important thing, because as we transform and heal ourselves, we can then, do it for others. And it is a lifelong process. We're constantly changing and constantly growing and learning. And so we're kind of all in this together, right? And one thing I was going to say about identity that I hope people really got out of our series is how unique each one of us are. That you're an absolutely unique person. There'll never be another person like you. And you were born with certain skills and talents, and you have a purpose. And, just the whole idea that every single person has that potential to contribute. And if they don't, something's missing, because they're the only ones who can make the contribution, because they're the only ones who are like themselves. So when you're not at Microsoft, tell us a little bit about yourself. First of all, what do you love about the Hispanic culture, the Hispanic heritage that we can celebrate this month? That you just think, wow, Latinos have got it going on, besides our great good looks, and
Our
that we
music
love
and our food.
to celebrate life. When you think about Hispanic heritage in the United States, what comes to mind that we should be looking at?
Yeah, so outside of work, and another core component of my identity is I'm the mother to a 7-year-old that, as I've often say, has taught me more about life that I could potentially teach him. Those moments of living life to the fullest, of experiencing even the smallest of things as the biggest, most important, most amazing things that have ever happened in his life, have always been a reminder of the importance of being present. I love to be involved in the community. I do tons of mentoring, both inside and outside of Microsoft. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and so there's plenty of opportunities to be back in nature and connect with nature, which is also something that I love. And then reading and exercising. Those are the things that
Sounds like you're really busy.
I try.
But that's so important to share with people. You keep your resiliency, how you keep your positive attitude, how you keep your health up. Because in the past, I think a lot of times we didn't spend enough time taking care of ourselves so that we could have a good career, so we could move forward. But I think in the Latino culture, there's also a sense of enjoying life and this whole idea of family and community and sharing your gifts and serving others. And so it really sounds to me like that in your life and in your work, you really carry these values forward. So do you do that as a conscious thing, or is it just part of who you are? Do you try to pass that on into the corporation, or how do you work with that?
It's definitely conscious, and I look for ways to integrate it into my everyday actions. And so, you pose the question of what are some of the things that I love around the community, and how my heritage kind of like shapes the way that I lead. And one of the things that I hold really dear about the Hispanic heritage, my Colombian heritage, is that richness of our traditions and that resilience that defines us. I will say that my identity as a leader is deeply rooted in my Colombian heritage.
Mm-hmm.
That resilience, that adaptability, that doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter the challenges that have been thrown our way. Economic hardship, political instability. It's not just that we endure it, but that we thrive. Like there's a saying that I know it's true in many of the Latin American countries. Pa atrás ni pa coger impulso. So it's that spirit.
Say that again and translate that.
Pa atrás ni pa coger impulso. You don't step back, not even to gain momentum.
Ah.
And so it's that resilience. And having lived in Florida for many years, like I think about a palm tree and a hurricane. It's that flexibility, right? You don't break. You move and you adapt and you bounce back stronger. And so that strength that is born out of our experiences is something that I love about our culture. That resourcefulness that we bring is the second thing that I think it's super important for us to highlight. The latest study that was published shows that Latino entrepreneurs have created 5 million businesses across the US. This is the figures as of the end of 2023. And those 5 million businesses have generated over 800 billion in annual revenue. Tell me if this does not illustrate the ability that we have to be ingenious and creative and to relentlessly drive towards success.
Wow.
And it's that connection to work ethic, which is the third thing that I will highlight.
Well, and I think, because we've talked about this with some of our other folks online, it's the innovation, it's the creativity. Latinos started 80% of the small businesses in the last census. And so we have that entrepreneurship. It's part of our DNA, really, to be resourceful, to do more with less, to look around, to see what we can do better. And it makes us great change agents. Because it's not that we're not contento or happy or gracias, we're not grateful. But I think we do have a gene that says, wait a minute, we can overcome this, we can make this better, we can improve this. We have new ways of doing this. Let's think of creative ways of putting this together. And so you're right, we're such a resourceful, creative, innovative, business-oriented community. And even if you're in a corporation, you're still doing innovation and change.
Absolutely. And I think the piece that I want the audience to think about, especially as we are in this moment of celebrating our community during our Heritage Month, is that our history is rich, that we've had remarkable contributions, but most importantly, that we have boundless potential. Like we stand at a very pivotal moment with our unique ability to truly actualize our power as a community. And I think it's worth reflecting on that, but also celebrating it. Like, yes, we stand in the shoulders of giants, and we will be those shoulders for the next generations to come.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's not just that we're standing on their shoulders, but we also have a responsibility because of everything that, in addition to all of this resiliency and stuff, we have to remember how many people it took to get us to where we are today. For Latinos to be educated like we are, the sacrifices that took place for that. But, I think a lot because we're so diverse, we're growing so fast. So many of our people are young, so many are immigrants, a third, in trying to get Latinos to talk more, to be on the marquee, to work with diversity and inclusion. How do you see that? Because I really do see that as I work across the country, that it's still a black and white conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the work that needs to be done is internal. And so internal meaning each one of us as members of the community and as well as a community conversation. For us to be able to actualize the power that we have as a community, we must fully embrace who we are. That means honoring our heritage, our language, our tradition, our diverse experiences. I often use the example of my sister and I had similar experiences, and yet there could be no more two different humans. We share the same DNA, we share for the most part the same experiences, and yet we approach life very differently, right? And so how do we acknowledge the complexity within our community? How do we start as a community to also have conversations about some of the stereotypes that we have, some of our ways of being and thinking about gender and sexual identity and race and colorism? If
Yes.
we invest the time in understanding these issues and engaging in introspection first, we will raise our collective consciousness as a community. We will be able to support each other in a meaningful way. And this will help us celebrate a massive win as a community. It truly will be a victory for us because we will be able to leverage that shared resilience and resourcefulness to create a more inclusive and united front.
Yeah, and I really think Latinos are the answer because we are all the races. We come from 26 countries. We have so much diversity, and of course, my father was French Nicaraguan, so we have the French and the Germans and the Irish. We have all of these communities. If we can do this, if we can come together, if we can heal ourselves first and really look at some of the things, because they're just these rough edges and these painful things. And as a psychologist, if you don't bring these out, the first thing is awareness. The second thing is to learn and then let go. And if we can start doing that and also treating each other with that respect that comes out of our culture, because theoretically in our culture, you're supposed to respect every single individual. That's how we were raised. It doesn't matter your status. You're supposed to have that sense of respect for people. And, I agree with you. It starts here and then we bring it out into the world. It's such a beautiful thing to do. So let me ask you this. I think at Microsoft, and I remember this, I spoke there a couple times, but I spoke there once before COVID, and then I spoke there afterwards, and there were not as many people in the building. What's it like to be in an organization that is now fairly virtual, correct? And how does that, resonate with the Latino culture that's so relationship oriented? And how does that impact your diversity work?
I think it's actually been a welcomed experience, right? When you think about that connection to family and how many times, in order for someone to pursue a career, would insert here, whatever company it is that you want to pursue a career with, there's been the requirement for you to have to leave your family behind.
Yes.
I live in Florida and now I have to move to Texas because that's where the company is headquartered. And so this ability to be virtual has actually done a couple of things. One is allowed for greater representation across the company and across the world for people to have access to opportunities, which I think it's a welcome change. And then I think it's also created opportunities for individuals of historically marginalized communities to stay connected and grounded in the locations where they have support networks, right? Just little things. I started in Microsoft 9 years ago, and at that time I relocated to the Seattle area. And I was coming from Texas after having lived in Florida. So in Texas, I could walk or I could find a Colombian store and get some of the treats of my childhood fairly easy. That was not necessarily the case here, right? So it's just those little things that make a difference, right? It gives people the opportunity to decide if I do want to change and I want to relocate, or no, I'm settled. I have my family, my kids are going to school here, and
Yes.
grandma and grandpa are heavily involved. And so I don't want to disrupt the family dynamic. And now I have the opportunity to work for a big corporation and still stay connected to my community. So I think that is a benefit. Now, yes, we are in the Hispanic Latinx community, people oriented. culture. We love relationships. And so as a community, we've also had the conversations internally with our ERG on what does it mean and how do we support each other? How do we create those moments of connection? And how do we maximize those opportunities where we do get to come together in person?
So, and so what's the formula now, as far as people working virtually?
It's
Depends on the individual job?
no, it depends on the individual.
Uh-huh.
Majority of our jobs are virtual. Yeah.
Wow, that's just amazing to me. And the other thing I was going to say, and I know, you have to work across generations, but Microsoft is generationally very young, right?
We span across the totality of the generational spectrum.
But so this may be one of my prejudices, but aren't more young people involved in technology?
That is a little bit of the, I will say, misconception there is around representation in the industry. You have folks that have been with the company for over 25 years. Who have that institutional knowledge, and you also have folks that are young and starting right out of college, and so
Yeah.
it's a
Well,
it's
where I was going with this, since we're going through this immense intergenerational change now, with 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day, and then we have the millennials and Zs. Do you notice a difference since you work in a company that I think has a lot of young people? Do you notice a difference in the way young people are approaching identity? And as opposed, because when I work with young people, they're in intersectionality. They want to know who everybody is. They want to know your origin story. And I think I'm seeing a shift where this younger generation that is more multicultural is much more open to differences. But is that just me dreaming?
no, I think it's
Am I just having a good time here?
no, it's a really good observation, Juana. And so if I take it back to this conversation that we're having specifically around the Hispanic and Latinx community, there are more folks that are starting to question the existence of things that have been in place for a long time, like ERGs. Well, I don't just want to be part of the Hispanic Latinx ERG because I'm also an Afro-Latina and I want to be part of the Black Employee Resource Group, or I'm Indigenous. And so I also, I'm honoring my Indigenous roots, and I'm also identify as a Latina. And so I want to be able, and so it's been more of that, right? To your point, there are several components that make me who I am. Again, I'll use myself as an example. Yes, I'm Latina, but I'm also a mother. And so there's a parents ERG that I also want to be a part of.
But it almost seems to me that there are also small communities within the large community.
Correct.
And if we look at them as community builders and a place where somebody has a little extra understanding, a little bit of a home. And so people want to belong. And that's the way I'm seeing identity now, that it's becoming very multifaceted, very intersectional. And I really appreciate that, because you also belong to a generation, and there's a generational identity. And gender is now on a spectrum. And so you might have a different gender identity and want to really explore that. So I think we're coming to a new day on this, and that young people are taking the lead in more of a multifaceted, dynamic, be who you are kind of, and it's okay to be complex. We live in a society where homogeneity had been valued for so long, but in reality, human beings are amazingly multidimensional and complex.
And that's what makes us unique and special, and what makes relationships complicated.
Yeah. And so I think we're coming to a new era where we really can appreciate people who for who they are. And also that Latinos are kind of leading this charge, because, I love it when I do a Latino program. I might have people from 10 different countries in it, and all the different ages. And so we always have that diversity right at our dinner table. Yes. And I think that's what makes us de colores, like my shirt, that makes us so many colors, and that give us the opportunity to be the leaders of the new age. And by the way, I see you right there. It makes me very proud to be speaking to a young Latina like this that has forged such great ground in diversity and inclusion. And we're just getting started.
I'm just kidding.
We're just getting started. I think with this new generation Z that's coming, it's going to be so much fun, and that people are really going to be able to embrace each other for who they are. Well, I want to give you a chance for a last kind of what kind of advice would you give a young Latina who's really seeking to find her place? And the second part is, how do young Latinas survive and thrive in corporate America?
So I will start by saying that we've talked a lot about resilience and how it's a core part of our cultural identity. And so in order for us to be able to maintain that emotional resilience, we also have to focus on our mental well-being. Both of those pieces are crucial for sustainable leadership. And so the first thing is I invite everyone listening to this conversation to destigmatize self-care. Self-care is not selfish, it's essential. And as a community, we've been
Well, we never had a chance. I kind of kid because we never took a vacation when I was a kid, and I can't ever remember going out to dinner. And, so working class. And so the whole idea, like my parents didn't go to the health club, they worked all the time. So it's a shift in our culture now, right?
absolutely.
It's now we have to learn how to like have hobbies.
And so, like, how beautiful it is that we've been able to move into a space which the younger generation can think about questions of how do I prioritize my well-being so that I can sustain my energy and my commitment, not just to my work, but to my community, right?
Mhm.
And so prioritizing that mental, emotional, and physical health is self-empowering. And I really want to invite people to change that narrative around self-care. The second one is seeking culturally attuned support. So I talked a little bit about therapy and coaching and how they're really powerful tools. We also explore the need that we have to heal from some of the traumas, right? And so finding providers who understand the cultural context and the challenges that are faced by our community can make a significant difference. All that to say, don't hesitate to seek professional help. It is a sign of strength and is a crucial step in healing and growing. And then if there is one thing that I will encourage everyone to do is to let your cultural identity be your source of strength and pride. It will ground you and it will connect you to a larger community of resilient individuals. This is something that I think it is super important for us to hug really, really, really close and tight. To actualize our power, we must fully embrace who we are.
Oh, I love that. And I do want to share just this because I did a lot of this work when I was in my 30s, and I used to do a lot of affirmations. And I think self-talk, it's almost like we have a computer been programmed in certain ways, right? And so you have these messages as you're growing up. And so I had to reprogram the computer by saying, I like myself exactly the way I am, right? Well, I just heard a joke about it. You go, every day I get better looking. I just can't wait for tomorrow. I mean, that whole idea, even Tony Robbins, the top motivational speaker in the country, gets up every morning and says, I'm going to win this one, and does his self-talk. So, I mean, it is a process. We're a work in progress. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart to watch what you've been able to do and how you have your heart open and how you're trying to bring other people along, and the work you're doing within such a large corporation to make this a reality. I want to just thank you so much. And then the whole idea, remember, she looked for mentors in high school. She looked for mentors in college. She looked for help and support in her businesses. She went across Microsoft. You have to keep building that sense of family, that sense of community, those mentors, those allies that help us. And then you do the same thing by playing it forward. So thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I will close with one thing that I think is super important, and it also becomes my thanks to you. We as a community need to be bold and unafraid of telling our stories, because when we share our experiences and challenges, we are empowering in each other, and we are ensuring that we're creating those spaces where we can be heard. And what you're doing through this series is exactly that. You're creating the spaces where we can share what the journey has been. And someone may identify with my story.
Right.
There will be points of connections that will motivate people to reach out and to form another bond, right? In taking advantage of all the technology that we have, right?
Go out today and call that mentor or that person, or stand outside the door at 7 o'clock in the morning and make sure you get that. You know, that's so inspiring for me, that we can help each other, and that we can, you know, continue growing and learning and embracing the other. And as we do that, we not only create a compassionate and open world, but we begin to grow our own potential, that we may flower and bloom so that everyone else can do that as well.
Yeah, and what
So-
you're doing is you're mobilizing the community, you're amplifying stories, and that's what's going to drive the change that we want to see, because you're creating.
So I want you all to remember this. This is a young Colombian immigrant who couldn't speak English, who's now working in diversity and inclusion at Microsoft. So those of you that are listening that are young and are saying, wow, what can I do with my life? Dream big. Gracias, mujer. Te quiero.
Besos.
Adios.